Morning, Dan and Amy. Now, Trump has gone from an authoritarian to an incompetent, but he's still got this leftist narrative about him colluding with authoritarians, meaning Putin. Let me just explain to you what an actual totalitarian government,
Please.
an actual despotic government looks like. It looks like a country that up until just a few years ago, the left was touting as a model of egalitarianism, as an example of socialism producing great results for the people. That is the country of Venezuela where they've even run out of dogs to chase for food. I mean,
squirrels.
as food.
I mean, they're right. There's nothing left. Rats, squirrels, right? Anything they can get their hands on, they've been eating.
Venezuela took its strongest step yet toward one-man rule under leftist President Nicolas Maduro, as his loyalists on the country's Supreme Court seized power from the National Assembly. They effectively dissolved the elected legislature, which is led by Maduro's opponents, and now his loyalists on the Supreme Court will just write the laws that he tells them to write. So it's the concentration of power in the hands of one. This is, I'm not kidding, go back 3-4 years in Salon.com. You heard it from Comrade Bernie previously, as well as other leftists, because that's what the Democrat Party has become, talking about the economic miracle from Chavez to Maduro in Venezuela. Remember President Obama yucking it up with his good friend Hugo before cancer got to Hugo. So just so you understand the actual manifestation of the ideas advanced by populist leftist demagogues like Bernie Sanders and the entire left-wing media set at all of the stylish left-wing rags like Salon. Just an FYI for comparison. Now, back to intrigue in this country. A lot of it surrounds Evelyn Farkas. She is a former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Obama for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia. She left the government in October of 2015. She gave an interview on the Morning Joe program on MSNBC. This was March 2nd, but since nobody watches MSNBC, nobody discovered it until 48 hours ago. And this is what Ms. Farkas said on MSNBC.
I was urging my former colleagues and frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russians.
If they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff and their dealings with Russia, this is somebody who left the government in October of 2015. So she seems to have confirmed that there was surveillance of Trump and Trump staff. Otherwise, what would she be referring to that has not otherwise been disclosed, other than more empty allegations? How we knew what we knew, a definitive statement. Because of the furor that portion of her interview created in the last couple of days, she went on CNBC yesterday to
what? Try and
revise and extend and clarify her remarks.
Well, what I was getting at was the fact that we were having now a transition of power from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And if indeed there was an investigation ongoing, if indeed there was information that the Obama administration had about Russian interference and possible American involvement, I wanted to make sure that Congress knew about it, that Congress had all that information.
Yeah, so it went from how we knew what we knew to a lot of if, a lot of supposition. She attempted, both in the CNBC interview and an interview with a local show in Boston, to essentially go from somebody in the know, not just in terms of techniques but substance, to somebody who only knew what she knew from news accounts, and she was only offering comment as an analyst. She was not somebody with specific inside intel. For more on this and related topics, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend, Lieutenant Colonel Cedric Leighton. He is a military intelligence expert, security consultant who has served on both the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council. Colonel Leighton, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet, Dan. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. So why don't we start with Ms. Farkas's original statement and her clarifications yesterday, and how you read between the lines to make any determination on which part of what she said, if anything, is credible.
Well, it's kind of an extraordinary statement. You know, if the Obama administration had done something where they were actually surveilling the incoming Trump administration or the Trump campaign, then that is something that would have been handled, at least if it was done legally, through a FISA court. And regardless, if she knew something about it because of her position within the Obama administration, it's something that you would never have talked about, from that standpoint. So it's odd that she would mention it in that way. What's also odd is, and what you're hearing there is the dog from Venezuela in the background.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, he escaped. Congratulations. Thank you for taking him in.
You're so cute.
But,
who let the dogs out? Colonel Leighton did.
Is that Evelyn Farkas was saying some things that are just kind of extraordinary from that standpoint. You don't ever talk about operations like this just from a pure operational perspective, but if something like this did happen, it points to some real irregularities or possible irregularities in how these kinds of events were unfolding, and that's something that from a national security standpoint is a bit disturbing.
But if she left office in 2015, it's now 2017, and she has still all this information. I mean, don't you think she tried to gather, or they did, the Obama administration tried to gather and leak as much intel on Trump before leaving?
Well, that was, I think, their purpose. And, there's always a distinction between opposition research in politics and in intelligence or law enforcement type information, or at least there should be. And that's I think, the key question. Did those two areas, between opposition research and intelligence/law enforcement, did those two areas get entangled? Did they get mixed up in a way that is not allowed in our country? And that certainly would be a question to ask.
What do you make of former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Flynns' overture to both the House and Senate Intel committees to testify under a protection of immunity? He's extending the offer. He's making the move, suggesting a desire to testify if he's given a grant of immunity. How should we understand that?
Well, it's hard to know the full extent of, first of all, what he's asking for and why he's asking for it. I used to work for General Flynn when he was the Director of Intelligence on the Joint Staff, and I was one of his division chiefs, deputy directors, and that particular area of immunity gets to be very tricky. In some cases, people will look at immunity as being something that is only requested if you're guilty of something. That, of course, legally is not always true. Sometimes there's something else that, comes up in the types of environments that, these people work in that requires, perhaps a different approach from a legal standpoint. So what I think he wants to do is he wants to tell his story. He wants to be out there, and he wants to actually say something that may impact, may put to bed the suspicions about Russia. If that's the case, that of course would be a benefit to the Trump administration. If, on the other hand, he wants to take somebody down with him, then that becomes another issue. And so we don't know enough to really be able to say at this point exactly what kinds of areas he'd want to be touching on, what his story actually is, and how it would affect the FBI investigation that's currently going on as well.
And General Flynn's lawyer said that, quote unquote, he has a story to tell. So we know that there's something there, but he might just be smart counsel to protect yourself, considering, he gave 2 years of his life to President Donald Trump into that administration, and they kind of threw him under a bus and then backed up over him. Do you know how he's doing today or what he's doing?
I have not been in touch with him since he became the director of the DIA, so I don't know. And of course, then it was his relationship with the Trump administration. I wasn't a part of that, but I think that in this particular case, he's really focused on knowing him from the past. I would say he's really laser focused on his defense. I think that he is going to try to set the record straight from his standpoint, and that I think is it's going to be a difficult thing, even if there are no issues, because people always have competing interests. But I think that's what he's focused on. I think he's looking at protecting his name or salvaging his good name, and that's primarily what he will be doing. And I think his lawyer is approaching it in such a way that, if successful, would allow him to do just that.
What's your assessment of Devin Nunes' handling of the investigation so far that the House Intelligence Committee is doing, and the calls by Adam Schiff and now at least one Republican member of Congress that Nunes recuse himself?
Well, I think the way in which Chairman Nunes went to the White House is very strange. The whole issue there with going to the White House, not quite undercover, because that would be too strong a term, but going in there, relatively secretly, and then talking to people who at this point at least are anonymous, and then since those are executive branch people, turning around and telling the president about what he had just seen. That's very odd, because in spite of the fact that obviously Devin Nunes is loyal to President Trump and served on his transition team, there's one thing that's pretty sacrosanct in Washington, and that's the division between the branches of government.
Yeah, but let me just interrupt you there for a second, because here's the thing about that. These are unusual times, it seems to me, and there's a lot of allegations back and forth about whether or not there's a fifth column action going on in parts of the intelligence community, the backbiting within among factions of the intelligence community. So he goes to meet with whistleblowers, effectively, which you would do in secret to protect their identity. Effectively, he goes somewhere in the executive grounds where you can securely look at classified information potentially, and then he turns around and he reports, at least describing what he obtained, to the Washington Press Corps, which means to the entire world. So is that unorthodox? Perhaps, but does it rise to the level of concern about his integrity? I'm not sure about that.
Well, yeah, and it's something that frankly, I don't think he's defended himself quite well on. It is certainly possible that he wanted to meet with potential whistleblowers in a way that would protect their identity and protect sources and methods, as the term is in the intelligence business. But usually what would happen in a case like that is they would pick a place that was neutral, that was either not part of either branch, or would be off the grounds of something as sensitive as the White House. And they would also have the facilities on Capitol Hill. There are secure facilities on Capitol Hill. I've been in them that would be able to handle those kinds of sensitive meetings. But sometimes you do want to avoid going to either location. And if these people are in the executive office building at work there, which is what some of the reports seem to indicate, then that may be something that they did. What strikes me about this, Dan, is that this seems to be it's kind of half-baked. It's one of those situations where he gets information and it seems like it's not thoroughly analyzed. And it could very well be that there was something that really bothered him there. It does sound like that was the case. But what I don't understand at this point is why he wouldn't include his Democratic counterpart, the ranking member, Adam Schiff, on this, or at the very least brief him before he went to the president and the press. And the reason I say that is that the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has had a tradition in the past of being fairly bipartisan. And that, this is something that, because of this, and I'm sure there are other issues out there as well. But this kind of brings that to a head and does stymie the investigation that they were planning.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Cedric Leighton, military intelligence expert and security consultant who's previously served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well as the National Security Council. Colonel Leighton, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet, Dan.
Oh,
you bet, Amy.
hey, and what kind of dog do you have?
Yeah, but please let him
We
out.
have a Vizsla.
Oh, I'm thinking about getting a Vizsla.
Of course,
I am.
We'll give your dog breakfast.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
we don't want to get attacked by PETA around here. Thanks for the call. Or thanks for joining us, Colonel Leighton. Appreciate it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.